My next guest has a very specific set of skills. He's managed search efforts for over 500 abducted children around the country. He's a retired cryptologic Master Chief Petty Officer in the U.S. Navy and a reserve deputy in Alabama. He serves in lead roles in three different anti-trafficking organizations, and his rescue work has been chronicled on CNN, The Early Show, The Today Show, Dateline, MSNBC, and 48 Hours. Today he's going to talk about how to spot human trafficking and what you can actually do. Stay to the end where he'll share tips on how to keep kids safe online. Dog trainer, pastor, considers napping one of his very specific set of skills. Brad Dennis, everyone.
Thank you.
So help us understand the different types of trafficking. There's two different types?
There is two different types. I kind of thought we were going to talk about napping a little bit more, but there's just two different types. There is labor trafficking and sex trafficking. And sex trafficking is the one that most of us really kind of think about when we understand the word human trafficking. But labor trafficking is actually one of the largest and most underreported that we have in the United States.
And what is labor trafficking?
Well, labor trafficking is where we are going to use force, fraud, or coercion against a human being for them to perform some form of labor service or have some type of debt bondage. And then obviously we are not going to pay them. We are going to continue to use that force, fraud, or coercion against them. And it's one of those three elements that becomes really key in developing whether or not this is a human trafficking victim or not.
So it has to have those elements of coercion, non-payment.
Correct, absolutely.
Which in our county, in Escambia County in Florida, which do we see more of?
The ones that have been most reported and the ones that have been, the most combated by law enforcement here locally has been the sex trafficking side of things. And a lot of that sex trafficking is either familial based, which is being done by a family member, or it has been someone that has brought a victim from out of state. They are probably transitioning through our area since we are sitting right on the I-10 superhighway.
Yeah.
And have probably stopped here long enough to advertise or try to make some type of sexual commercial exploitation moment with that particular child or that woman.
So they're not necessarily kidnapped. I kind of joked, I referenced to the Liam Neeson movie Taken in your intro, but that is truly how most of us think of sex trafficking. And I honestly don't think most of us even think about labor trafficking until now. But when it comes to sex trafficking, not everyone is kidnapped like in that movie. Is that correct?
Yeah, we really just do not see those type of victims. Can it happen? And does it happen? It does. But more than likely what is happening is that the trafficker has found a young person, usually a teenager. They're putting a lot of content out online. They're talking about how they're disgruntled with their family, problems that are associated with school. And they will start a grooming process with this child. So it's really that grooming versus just coming in and snatching a person away that really befalls a number of our victims. We have a growing trend in the United States of underage minors, young teenagers that are falling to these types of predators. We call them the Romeo predators. They're going to offer them love and attention and affection. And many times that's exactly what that teenager is looking for. And any time that you can figure out what a person needs and you begin to offer that need up to them, you immediately have them.
This is a weird question, but do the predators know that they're predators? I ask that because I've seen interviews with pedophiles that they don't consider themselves a predator.
That is very true. I would say traffickers, those that are trying to commercially exploit someone, In other words, I am going to sell you so I can make a profit, so I don't have to go out here and earn a living in any other way. They know what they are doing, obviously, but I think you're correct that many predators, per se, there's a number of them that really just do not believe that they are truly prey. They believe that their relationship with a minor, their relationship with an underage child is something that shouldn't be considered as predatory behavior, at least in their state mind.
So how would on the flip side, how would a teen or young person become aware that they're being groomed? How would they know the difference?
That's a very good point. And I would say that, obviously it's going to take a lot of self-awareness on their part of, whatever this story and whatever this person is trying to tell me or give me or sell me, is there strings being attached? Do I see strings being attached? They're offering me some jewelry. They're offering me to buy me a new phone, a pair of jeans or something. But if I continue to peel the layers of that onion back, are they actually asking me to do something for that? And if they are, then that's not love. That's not real affection. That's not adoration, right? That's not even lust. There's a payment that they're going to require of me, and that's not what they should be wanting. That's not what they should be looking for.
And that is kind of what defines, or tell me, does this define trafficking in comparison to just an inappropriate relationship? Trafficking means that there's some sort of exchange of money or goods, and then inappropriate relationship is just that, an inappropriate relationship.
That is true. For trafficking to exist, especially from that sexual side of things, there has to be a commercial element to it. Something of value is being traded for that sexual performance. And that sexual performance can be sexting, it can be, videoing, it can be any element of intercourse or any element of sex, but there's got to be that something of value traded. And that something of value doesn't have to be money, right? It can be a pair of blue jeans, it can be a cell phone, it can be any of those things.
So in, I think, 48 states in the United States, marriage under 18 is legal. Would a forced marriage where a dowry is exchanged be considered sex trafficking?
That's going to be up to the state interpretation of that relationship as it compares itself to the state statute. So, does the dowry itself constitute a commercial element? It does. But is the commercial element now being used against that victim? Is the victim being required to enter into this relationship to expunge that debt? In a lot of countries, especially overseas, that is considered human trafficking. But how the state actually writes their statute and how they interpret the statute is going to be up to the individual states.
And that's tough because, from what I understand, a lot of those small communities that are experiencing those forced marriages, they're vulnerable populations anyway, that tend to alienate themselves from government regulation. So it's a tough one.
Yep. Well, and because of that entire situation that you just stated, it makes it so much more difficult for authorities to even investigate it, because no one within that circle is going to come forward. No one within that circle wants to become a a value-added witness to the government, because within that society they're so used to being exclusive. They're used to being hands-off from the government. They don't want that kind of interaction with the government. And so therefore, like you said, it becomes a perfect storm for victimization and exploitation.
And I just learned that in the state of Florida, every adult is a mandated reporter. So if they see any sort of child endangerment, you're by law required to report it. A lot of us get stuck there. We don't know what to do. We've all had, not all, but I think a lot of us have had neighbors or situations where we've seen maybe something doesn't feel right. One time I was in the Keys and we were staying with family, and there was a maid who came in and she spoke Spanish. So I was talking to her in Spanish. The Russian woman that was overseeing her became very, very nervous when I started to speak to her in Spanish, and something inside didn't feel right, but I didn't know what to do. For people, and I hope you can speak to this, like, people want to know, what can I do? What do I do in circumstances like those where I don't want to make it worse for the person, but I definitely don't want to do nothing?
Yeah, I mean, it does become difficult, right? I mean, everyone wants, what is that cookie cutter indicators that as soon as I see it, I know that I'm supposed to call. And unfortunately, everything is in the open. Back when this first started, and Congress gave this a name back in 2001 and called it human trafficking, modern day slavery, and they enacted the very first act, the Trafficking Victims Protection Act. Everyone used to really push this little mantra out there that is happening right in front of our very eyes all the time. But even though it's happening there, it's very difficult to understand that what I'm seeing matches the criteria for me to actually be able to report this and make a call. And so every jurisdiction that we have ever worked with, and I work all over the country, law enforcement, every jurisdiction will tell you right from the very beginning, we would much rather you report it and let us rule it out. Let us come there and investigate it and find out that there was nothing to your concerns than not report it and allow this victimization to continue. So in the state of Florida, or wherever your listeners are, it's really simple. Called the National Human Trafficking Hotline is the very first way of doing that. The National Human Trafficking Hotline is run by Polaris Project out of Washington, D.C. Their number is 1-888-373-7888. They made it really simple, especially for people like me. I can do this, 1-888-373-7888. And when you call there, you can remain anonymous. You can say, I just have this really weird suspicion. I have this gut feeling. I saw this. Whatever it is, lay it out for them. They are mandated by Congress at that point to report that to the local law enforcement agency, as well as reporting that to the local service provider in that region in case there is victims. It kind of helps us become aware that, hey, there's an investigation that's about to start and you may get some victims. I know that because here in our area, I am that service provider. So my phone will ring from the National Human Trafficking Hotline. If it is a minor, especially here in our state, every adult, like you said, is a mandatory reporter. Then you call the Florida Child Abuse Hotline. When you call it, make sure that you state that I believe this is dealing with a child. I believe that it deals with human trafficking. Because when you say that, it immediately kicks over to a whole different maltreatment code within their system. They have specially certified investigators that will come out and look at this as a human trafficking case, not as a domestic violence case.
That's a really good tip. What should people avoid doing when they see something? What should they not do?
Try to rush over and intervene. I've seen that. I've seen it. I have come across a lot of really, really bad things out there on the streets. I mean, if this is truly a predatory situation, then this is truly a trafficker with their trafficking victims. What you're trying to interrupt is their money flow. And people get really upset when you kind of mess with their cash flow. You don't know if that individual has weapons on them. You don't know that in many of the cases when we see young kids that are being forced into sex slavery, either in hotels, in strip clubs, in massage parlors, or even out on the streets. What a lot of people don't realize is that it's more than one person that is pushing that kid out there. There's more than one person that is keeping that child under control. And so you may see one person with that child, but you don't see as the other three that is also part of that whole crew and that element. And so don't take that chance. Allow that to be law enforcement's job.
Which is who your organizations work with directly in order to do, if you will, a Liam Neeson takedown and extract the kids, correct?
Correct. Yeah, I mean, we can call ourselves rescue organizations all we want, but we are an anti-human trafficking organization that primarily deals with minors and teenagers, but as far as we're concerned, every victim is somebody's child, regardless of their age. So that means all of them. But our job, we build the intelligence, and we do that by working online. We do that by working in the streets. We do that by going into a lot of these locations. And we build that intelligence and supply that back over to law enforcement for them to do their job. The one thing that this world doesn't need is more vigilantes in it. And there's plenty of those people out there. And unfortunately, that causes a lot of problems with law enforcement and a lot of problems for the victims. Because then the victims are the ones that get caught up in the midst of all of that.
Right.
They've been victimized enough.
I agree. It feels a bit like whack-a-mole, I imagine.
Yeah, I mean, it does. And it's, it's one of the most rewarding things that you can do, and also one of the most frustrating things that you can possibly do. A lot of young women and teenagers really do not even understand the cycle of victimization that they are currently in. They don't see it for what we want to call it. They don't recognize the labels that we want to affix to it. In their mind, this is still a love relationship. This is a family ordeal. It's something along those lines. It is not what, Brad, you want to call it. You call it human trafficking. You call it slavery. You call it exploitation. I don't see that. This is me being me. And so when they are in that place, the best that we can do is try to pull them out of that situation and present them what we perceive, and see if that helps them. We offer them services. Some take it, some don't. That part becomes very frustrating.
To speak to that, and to speak to the part of all ages, victims in all ages. I don't know, Rashida Jones, I don't know if you know the actress Rashida Jones, she did a documentary called Hot Girls Wanted about the amateur porn industry in Florida. Like, it couldn't get more specific. The porn industry in California now requires condoms to be used while filming. So a lot of those filmmakers have come to Florida because, of course, why not? Because, a Florida man, like, Florida's always crazy, right? Well, there's no federal regulations on porn. So when you say, they don't see it that way or whatever, it made me think of those girls. They're seeing these ads to be in these films, and in some cases that's truly what it is. It's, they are consenting, and it's not great, but they're consenting to that. In other cases, I could see where it would be a fake ad and they could get trapped in a bad situation, or the situation could seem okay at first and then kind of take a dark turn, and they would be a trafficked person because of this industry. With that in mind, do you think making some federal regulations on pornography could help protect women against being trafficked?
Yes. I mean, the simple answer is any type of regulation on that industry, in my in my humble opinion, can only help. I cannot tell you the number of, I just call it this for lack of a better term, okay, but the number of backyard pornography videos that are shot by traffickers that are then placed up on, even on Snapchat and on TikTok just for a quick price, for a quick sell. And once it's posted up there, and once it's pushed anywhere online, for that particular woman, that particular child, boy or girl, it's out there forever now. And it's always going to be out there. And that's going to be a part of their story now. And it was also someone else could profit. I think one of the things that we also need to at least be able to talk about and address, and it needs to be addressed in forums like this, where it is open conversation. But men need to realize and recognize that we are the demand to all of this. And if we ever want this to stop, if we ever want this to ever end, you know, I hear all of these wonderful mission statements from all these new organizations, how we are going to stop human trafficking, you know, in our generation. You only stop it when you address the demand. And the demand is men. And until men understand that, even when they go to pornography sites, or even when they try to do something as what they consider to be very innocent, right? Because that's a consensual thing. You really do not know how consensual it is. And even at the most highest of levels of pornography, you do not know how consensual that truly is. And those actors and actresses, whether or not there was actually exploitation going on. So by you actually going there, you are allowing this to continue. And so we have to have that honest conversation. And we have to say that we need to stop that. We need to be able to hold each other accountable for that. And we need to be able to change the way that we envision women and young girls in our own culture and in our life. We're quick to throw up stereotypes to faraway countries in the way that they treat their women, yet we are allowing it as something that is so relevant in our world today here in the United States.
That's so true. And prostitution, I know prostitution and porn, not the same in things, but I feel like that's another area that it's not going away. Prostitution, as you said, the demand, right? It's not going away. And so that's another one where, maybe controversially so, I ask myself, should we make that legal? Because if we did, would that protect women, young girls who aren't able to distinguish, oh, this is love, or this is a job, or this is okay and this is not okay for whatever reason? Having some boundaries that are federally enforced, I would think might help it. I don't know for sure, but it's something that I think about a lot. And I know that one of your organizations helps with some legislation, correct?
Correct.
Have you ever considered pursuing legislation around federally regulated porn and legalization of prostitution?
Well, I mean, the legalization of prostitution is a wide and varied topic that is discussed quite often, and I am by no means the expert of that. And so it's hard for me to be able to say one way or the other on that. I know that there's several countries around the world where prostitution is legal. And they like to tout the fact that they don't have as huge of a human trafficking problem. I don't know that that's true or not. I can tell you that in places in Nevada that we go to every single year, one of the organizations I work with is based out of Las Vegas, so we work there a lot. You can go just outside of the city and there's legal brothels everywhere, legal prostitution everywhere. And yet the sale of young kids and women for a trafficking profit, for exploitation purposes, happens right on the Strip and all throughout Las Vegas and all around Nevada and all around the other cities and states in which it is legal. So I don't know that we actually end it. I think that there's always that element of a demand, and truly there's where we stop it the most, not through a different law or a new set of laws, but by actually going after the consumer that is driving this in the first place. The because what they're going for is illegal, right? I mean, that is illegal. You shouldn't be trying to have sex with minors. You should not be going after that. There's a lot of stats out there in the world today that states that, you know, our age of prostitution for when it starts in our country, in the United States, continues to get lower and lower, and that's only driven by the demand.
Yeah, there's another kind of odd case in which women are being exploited, and that's in prisons. Have you read much about that? Do you know about Richard Rawls? He's 79 now, I think, and he got an incredibly short sentence for having 24 women captive in his house, because in Florida, at least, you can just send people money in prison. And then you write them, and then they're like, oh, I gave you money. And then these women feel obligated to these men. It's just like what you were saying earlier about young girls online. Oh, well, now they feel obligated to this person. These are, for the most part, adult, non-minor ladies in prisons who are getting out of prison. Their soon-to-be trafficker knows the date and time that they're getting out, and they wait for them, and they know they have nowhere to go. It's so awful. That's why I said this must feel like whack-a-mole, because in so many, it's not just one area. There's so many areas in which this is happening, and
Right.
you know, as an onlooker, you feel so helpless.
I mean, your term whack-a-mole is actually very appropriate, because we actually use that term quite often within our team. You kind of have to have a little bit of dark humor, I guess, to be able to continue to do this. At the same time, it's frustrating, because you know that those are lives that are at stake, and those are women and kids that are being exploited for absolutely no good purpose whatsoever in the world. These are human beings. No one should be exploiting them like that, but they are. It is not just because they are putting money on their canteen. You know, they're giving them money to be able to spend there. They're actually bailing them out. They're putting up the bonds for them. And so it's really simple, because I can go through any jail view of any county and any town and see what you were arrested for. I can find that you were already in this industry, or maybe you were arrested for narcotics. And so if I bond you out and I now supply your habit, I have you. And again, it's finding that need that you have and exploiting that need. And unfortunately, it's growing. It is a growing trend. I don't care what anyone wants to say. The numbers speak for themselves. From where we used to be to where we are today, it is growing.
So how do you keep from not being discouraged and just quit? What's your personal driving force to continue to do the whack-a-mole, continue to do this talk, which you have done so many times and continue to do?
Well, I mean, yes, I have some personal driving reasons. I would say that one of those reasons, I call her Diamond. She was my very first trafficking case. The way I view it, she was a missing 14-year-old that went missing. And unfortunately had gotten called up with a boyfriend in school, and then that boyfriend in school introduced her to his older brother, which happened to be a trafficker, and the exploitation began. And that exploitation, at least for that moment, ended at one of our local motels when we were able to track her down there, and law enforcement was able to get her out. But I stayed for a week in the hospital with her because she had suffered from a lot of internal injuries. But the reason that it has such a poignant effect on me is that just like 2 months prior to all of this, she had actually come to one of my youth meetings when I was a youth pastor. And she had come there. You could see that there was something wrong, that she needed to reach out and talk to someone. We tried, my wife tried, even my daughters tried, and just could not break through. And now all of a sudden I'm going and finding her in this situation. And I cannot help but say that if I don't go out there, and if other organizations aren't willing to go out there, then we're going to have more of those diamonds that are going to be stuck out there in that world that we're not going to be able to find.
Yeah. So what can we do? What you said you had some tips for parents of how to keep their kids safe online, and of course, if you can think of anything else that would allow my listeners, who are mostly in the United States, but we do have a few listeners in the UK, Australia, and some other places. Can you give us some practical things of what to look for? You told us the number to call in the US, and then how to keep our kids safe online.
Sure. Well, I mean, it's different times right now that we're all dealing with. So first and foremost, everyone to stay healthy and safe, but it is different times, right? All of our kids are home, at least in a lot of places, and that's a new normal. And what that shows, and what I was watching today just on TV, is how so many parents are having to turn to technology to allow their kids to just sit there and veg in front of a computer, supposedly to do homework, but there's also a lot of other reasons that they're out there. Our kids today, their lives is about their content that they put out there online. That's their clicks that they roll in. And everything is based on how many snaps they get and how many pokes they get and how many likes they get and shares and everything else. And unfortunately, the more that they put out there as content-wise, then the more that predators have to work with. It is not just their friends that watch these things. It is also predators. How do I know? Well, when we have to go find a missing kid, how do you think we try to track down a missing kid today? But go on their social media accounts and locate them that way, and go to all their friends and find out all of their life story and all their details. And so if we can do it for the positive reason, then there's bad people out there that can do it for the negative. So parents today need to be aware of the apps that are dangerous for their kids. And the apps that are dangerous right now that are really, really getting stronger and stronger with the danger is Snapchat. It used to be Kik. Kik has kind of been taken away now. TikTok is the new one. And there's a laundry list of other websites. And I know you're going to put up our Facebook pages. We recently just put a whole bunch of those websites on our Facebook page for parents. It really takes a lot of open communication. Parents, don't be afraid to talk about tough subjects with your kids. Talk about sex. Talk about what these different apps are. Talk about the dangers of those apps. Because if you're not talking about it with them, they're talking about it with their friends. And again, that becomes a slippery slope, because who is going to change the narrative the most? Is it going to be you, or is it going to be their friends? And so make sure that you're the one that's in charge of the narrative. And know those apps and know how to get into their apps. Understand that just because you're on their Facebook page, they know you're there, right? That doesn't mean that that's where they're communicating. They're communicating in Instagram and Snap and TikTok and all the other things. So you cannot just be on one. You have to know about all of them. And unfortunately, our world is changing on a daily basis. So I have no doubt that there's going to be some new apps that will come out because of COVID-19, just to exploit the reason that our kids are at home and let me build up my membership that way. So we have to be really aware of those things. When your kids start having these communications, you'll start to see changes in their attitudes and changes in their behavior. They'll start to hide things more often from you. They'll start to hide their behavior. They'll start to close the door and get away from you more. You may see some different changes in other things, like they start to receive presents and gifts. They have a different phone that you're not used to. Maybe it's a burner phone. They'll start to do those types of things. Be really, really aware of that, because someone is possibly grooming them.
Do you feel like in most cases it's enough to have open communication with the kid, or do the apps need to be taken away?
Well, I'm maybe a little bit more old school, and that's because of what I do and the things that I see that our kids grew up with. My daughters did not have any of those apps. I'm going to allow it. They had friends, they had their time in school, they had their chance to talk on the phone. Let's build that communication. And it was later on, when they were out of high school, was when they finally got their very first social media app.
Yeah.
There was other ways that I could allow them to communicate and stay in touch with their friends, versus allowing them to do it behind closed doors where I don't know what's going on.
So your tips are monitor and be aware of the apps, which you said the website is a great resource for that, and have open communication with your teen. And then you listed the behaviors to keep an eye out for. Are there any other tips that you want to offer our listeners before we wrap it up?
I'd say the biggest thing that, we're not really talking about abductions, and we're not really talking about some of the other dangers, and there's so many dangers in the world today that
Sure.
I'm not trying to throw scare into people. But when school starts back up, which it will, one of the biggest things that parents need to understand is, especially when it comes to the predators that do want to do the kidnapping and the abduction, the vast majority of them do it very close to your home. Matter of fact, most abductions occur within a quarter of a mile of your home. And if you think about it, what's within a quarter of a mile of every single one of our homes is our bus stops. And so our kids are walking to and from bus stops, and many of them are so engrossed in their phone or listening on a device that they're not paying attention. We need to get back to teaching our kids situational awareness and being aware of their surroundings at all times. Let them be in charge of their safety, but you've got to teach them that and tell them the truth about it so that they begin to be very aware of what's going on around them.
That's a really good tip, and I agree. Where can people find your organization, find you online to learn more, dig in?
Sure. KlaasKIDS, KlaasKIDS.org. KlaasKIDS is named after Polly Klaas, that was abducted and murdered out of Petaluma, California on October 1st of 1993. And Father started this. I ran the search for Polly when she went missing, and now we continue to do this to help other families. Our Facebook page is KlaasKIDS Search Center for Missing Children, and you can go on there and find all those apps that we were just talking about.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Brad. This was great. I hope that anyone listening to this will feel a little bit more enlightened, aware, that their eyes will be opened, and that they'll feel empowered on how not to be the consumer. Don't pay for sex. Don't consume porn. Was there any other tips on that? I think I listened to another talk where you shared a couple tips, something about fair trade.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Well, there is a number of different organizations that you can go online and just do a fair trade search, and that will tell you which organizations have fair trade practices. They don't involve child labor or any type of human trafficking to produce their goods. So therefore, we become smarter consumers.
I love that. Thank you so much. And if you are listening or watching on YouTube today and you liked this episode, share it with a friend. If you feel like it would be important for somebody that you know who has a child, share it. And if you want clickable resources that were mentioned in this episode, text REAL to 66866. Thanks again, Brad. I really enjoyed talking with you, and I look forward to keeping in touch to see what your organization does. So thanks. Awesome. That's a wrap.